A riddle for you. It's an old riddle. I should have asked you this riddle in the last class before you read today's article, but you can still try it out on your relatives over Thanksgiving and see if it works on them. Stumped me once. A man and his son are driving on the highway. They get into a car crash and both the man and his son are severely injured. The son is taken to the emergency department. When he gets there, the surgeon walks into the room and says, "I can't operate on this child. He's my son." Yes, Maeve. The surgeon is the mom. Oh, you got it immediately. Good. We should get that, right? We shouldn't be tripped up by this. We shouldn't look in blank expression like, how is that possible? Statistically, though, and I'll talk more about this in a bit, this has not changed as much as some of you want to believe it's changed. But this article, the research for this article was done actually even before 1997, was done in the 1980s. So it's been a while. I used to assign this article a lot, and then I stopped and brought it back. In some ways, I think it's actually as or more relevant than it was before, but we'll see how it goes. Let's see. So I asked you a number of questions. So Cassell sets out with the idea that she is going to find that male and female surgeons are different from each other, that the women are going to be more compassionate and understanding, that the men are going to be more, harsh and stereotypical male surgeons. When she actually interviews the people she's able to talk to and observe, she finds something curious. Well, Silence, what did one of the female surgeons find was happening to her?
So the female surgeon complained to Cassell that that she was, a lot of the male surgeons and male doctors would just go up to her and start complaining about their relationship problems, and the person she was interviewing was like, I didn't even ask for it, nor did I want it, but they were doing it anyways, because I guess they felt that she would be more open to listening to them because she was a female.
Yeah, so she's like, I think you put it, expected to be their emotional support animal.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I have to say, so my wife's a professor over at SUNY, and for one thing, she gets a lot more people talking to her in general, and she is always having to deal with fragile male professor egos all the time, people who just can't make it. Now, she's a nice person, my spouse, but does she want to do that at work? No, doesn't want to do that at work. In fact, would rather be able to, so what Cassell finds is that in many cases, the male and female surgeons want to act the same or do act the same. There's not a big difference in how they do their jobs. And so she then talks about, or I ask, well, what does this mean? What she's getting at here is that people are often kind of compelled to perform in a way because other people ask them to, even though they didn't want to. And so it's not simply that people are inherently more or less compassionate. In fact, she found some guy surgeons that were super nice and compassionate, female surgeons that were kind of mean. So it's not that people are necessarily inherently, naturally, biologically sex different, but we get put into roles and we're expected to do things. And so she's talking about something that people have started to understand, that we're often asked to do gender as kind of a performance. We perform gender, or we do it, or we're asked to do it, and we're rewarded for giving a good gender performance, and we're penalized for doing a a bad gender performance. Now, this relates to something that is kind of an important distinction that many social scientists have made. It probably is in some ways thanks to the feminist theorists of the 1970s and 1980s to distinguish between these two words, gender and sex. So by gender, when you're taking a sociology class or another anthropology class or something like that, what we mean by gender are all the social meanings, the roles, the ideas we have about people of different genders. So these are the things that we expect them to do. And then we try to separate that from the actual biological differences between people of different sexes. So the hormones, the genes, the chromosomes, the physical features, that the genitalia, the reproductive capacities, those are all biological differences. And what we believe is that gender, the ideas that we attach onto those biological differences, are socially constructed. In one society, it's expected that only women can weave. So there you'll find that people will talk about, oh yeah, those women, their hands are naturally made to weave. You go over to another society, then, only the men weave. People talk, yeah, those women, they aren't strong enough to weave, only us men can weave. So you'll have two different societies, same activity. People have completely different ideas about who does what or who should be what in that society. And it changes across societies and also changes over time. I'm wearing my bluest guy shirt today for the occasion, but in the olden days, like 100 years ago, in this country, actually, the little boys would wear pink and the little girls would wear light blue. And the reason for that is that red was seen as this very masculine color. So if you were a boy, you wore pink because you weren't quite red and masculine enough. And blue was seen as the feminine color, as kind of, more subdued. So if you're a girl, you wore light blue to kind of get you on the road to being subdued. Now we've changed that all around, but it's an indication that our expectations and our ideas shift over time. Now, two notes of caution here. When we say that gender is socially constructed, we're not saying everybody's the same or you can be whatever you want. It means that it's a product of society. And in fact, when we say something is a social construction, that actually means it's very real and it has a huge influence. I think we talked about how race is a social construction too. Now, again, that doesn't mean there's no biological differences between people. There are, but it's simply that it's our expectations and social ideas about it that make it salient, that make it important, that make it manifest in the world. The other thing that's happened is that people have taken this term in the popular sphere and they use it the wrong way. So people don't like to say sex because it's sex. And if you say sex a lot, then you might be one of those people. So they prefer the term gender because it makes it sound better, right? It's like less, it's a euphemism. It's like saying, I'm going to the bathroom and there's no bath there. It's a euphemism for something that people don't want to say. So when the ultrasound technology was coming out and my grandmother wanted to know what was the gender of the baby, I almost said, Grandma, we're trying to figure out what the sex of the baby is, not the gender. The gender is the social expectations. You're looking for the sex in the ultrasound. But I didn't, because she was my grandma. You don't want to say all that stuff. But you have to watch out for this, especially if you go to a gender reveal party. I don't know if you've ever been to one of these. I don't recommend them. Usually somebody's shooting off a cannon or burning down a forest, and then they figure out there's a boy or a girl. Oftentimes, I don't know, all I read about is people exploding things and burning things down. But it's when you're supposed to reveal the ultrasound of the infant They really should be called, technically, they should be called sex reveal parties. Because that's what they're revealing. They're not revealing, well, they're revealing a lot, their expectations. However, if they were called sex reveal parties, a whole different crowd would probably show up to them than the expectant parents and their buds. You'd have a whole different group of people there. So anyway, this is the difference between gender and sex. We'll talk about this a little bit more on Monday. So one of the best examples of the way people act and our expectations of them is the doctor fit. Bill, what is a doctor fit? A doctor having a tantrum. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say it's a little bit, well, Tyler, what do you think? Do you say tantrum? Why does a doctor do this anyway? What's the need for having a doctor fit? Yeah, I mean, well, let me put it to you this way. If I get really mad at you all and have a tantrum up here, that is a tantrum. Because, like, none of you right now are dying. The doctor fit is when something bad is happening and you go into like overdrive and you're like, scalpel, I need this, I need that, real fast. You actually have a reason to do it. So, what happens if a guy doctor goes and throws the guy doctor fit? What happens? Yeah, like wakes everybody up. They're giving them scalpels and getting excited and trying to save this person's life. It's George Clooney. He's giving us the male doctor fit there. Oh no, ER is probably a different generation for you all, but you're like, hey, I'm going to do that. Sounds good. However, a female surgeon does the exact same thing. The exact same, I need a scalpel. We need to save this person's life. I don't use this word anymore because I don't like to, but she does in the article. People start slowing. They do the opposite. Like start calling her B word and being all mean to her and not even doing what she wants. So nobody wanted to tackle this question. I can tell you for sure it shows up in teaching evaluations all the time. The things that my spouse has to worry about from her teaching evaluations are totally different than mine. It's a whole different thing. So, who's enforcing? Who's making sure that the male and female surgeons are doing the gender appropriate behavior? Who does that in those hospitals? Who are the enforcers of this? The nurses. The nurses are actually the ones in Cassell's study that are basically doing the enforcement. And you might think about this too in a college setting, or anytime that you have to evaluate a female or a male or a non-binary. This was a little bit before that became a thing. Anytime you have to evaluate a person, just think about that to yourself. Would I be evaluating this person differently if they were of a different class, a different gender, a different race? How does that, when I'm about to fill out that teaching evaluation, what would it be different if this person had different expectations? Now, I immediately regretted asking this question because, it's been a while since this research came out. And we all want to believe that things are getting better, and they are. I don't mean that they aren't. Yes, it's true. There are more women in the classroom. There are more women in STEM. All of these things are good. But I caution you a little bit to think that things are so much better. I looked it up. 2023, you can listen to this Freakonomics podcast with a couple of an MD and an economist about the question, why are there still so few female surgeons? This is 2023. Why are there still so few female surgeons? In this case, what it looks like happens is that actually, in many ways, they have pretty equal outcomes in terms of their surgery. Some people even argue that female surgeons perform better, objectively speaking. However, what happens is if there's a bad outcome from a male surgeon or a bad outcome for a female surgeon, they get evaluated differently. And the female surgeon gets punished much more and gets fewer referrals. So that's what they're saying is one of the reasons why this is still an issue and it's still a problem. And part of this also has to do with another question that none of you wanted to tackle, which is what happens when you have these typically male professions and women are able to break into them and start to get a foothold in them? What happens to those professions? So a couple things usually happen. One of the things that happens is often the profession just starts to go away. I don't know when the last time it was that you saw an actual doctor. Around here, it's kind of hard for me to see a doctor. I used to see doctors, but now all the doctors are gone. I only see nurses practicing, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants. I have nothing against nurse practitioners and physician's assistants. That's a great thing to do. We need more of them. It's wonderful. But it is kind of interesting that in many areas, it's very difficult to find just sort of a regular doctor anymore. So actually, some of these professions have shrunk or have been, are not as prevalent as they used to be. The other thing that often happens is they get, they're devalued or devalorized. So as I said before, I'm happy there are a couple of guys in here who want to be teachers, because actually a number of male teachers in this country is pretty much at crisis levels. There's very few of them left anymore. It's declined, and it's one of the reasons why there are political attacks on teachers these days, is because it's easier to attack a profession that now seems very, very dominated by women. For the last 2 years, my son in high school, the only male teacher he's had is phys ed. Everything else is women. Again, I don't have a problem with that. It's great. It's great that we have many women teachers, including in traditional male subjects like calculus and physics and those things. It's great. On the other hand, it might be nice every so often, to have some different role models, both for boys and girls and others. This is especially true with Black men in teaching, which the percentages seem to be declining and getting worse, to the point that it's something like 1.3 or 1.7% of high school teachers, which is way out of line for the population, both in public schools and for the population in general. So, for young Black students to not have this kind of role model, or for white students not to see a Black man in authority every so often, it's not good for our society. So again, I'm not saying nothing has changed. I'm just saying you have to watch out that, we have this assumption that everything's always getting better. It has to be different. At the end of the article, Cassell makes a kind of a funny claim for somebody who's been talking about, how gender is performed and how it's being done, she then says, well, it's also embodied. Kendra, what do you think? What does it mean that gender gets embodied? Yeah, I think that, so she's been talking about how we do gender, right? And how we perform it and how we get rewarded for a good performance and penalized for a bad performance. I think what she's saying here, I think you're right, is that over time, the more you do it, the more it just seems natural. And so eventually you get to the point where it doesn't seem like you should do anything else. And the way that you move your body in the world, the way that I'm not sure if you've heard those, what do they call it? Man spreading, how men take up more space and and it just becomes natural. It's like the way you move through the world. You always have taken up a lot of space, got your legs spread out wide, making sure, everything's. Whereas, fortunately, we have enough room in this classroom that we can all spread out. We don't have to have people with their legs crossed or anything. We can all just take up lots of space. But, this is one of the ways in which people just move through the world, and they just assume that it's natural to do it. It feels like the thing that they should do.